Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We're going to talk about optimizing your relationship with a quick little 3-step framework. We just broke this down to 3 easy steps, and there's more complication to each step, but basically this framework you can latch onto when you want to look at your relationship and say, I want to make it better, I want to optimize it, I want to correct something that's not working well. Any kind of change you want to make to that, we believe that this little framework will help you through that process. Now, we've just talked about relationships. The last 3 podcasts, we talked about 2 different podcasts on personality types in relationships, dichotomies, and then cognitive functions, and how they relate to each other and in relationship. And then we talked about, last podcast, we talked about systems thinking in relationships and how there is really no cause and effect in your relationship. Everything you deal with between the two of you, your lover, your spouse, your mate, your pair bond partner, everything you deal with is an emergent of an entire system that's running. And all the nodes or parts of that system influence what emerges in the relationship. If you haven't listened to those 3 podcasts, it'd be really good to go back and listen to them before you listen to this one, because this one's going to build upon some of the things we talked about, especially in the systems thinking one. And we're going to give you some application today to think about how you can make the changes you want to make by building upon that systems thinking idea. So when we look at your relationship in its entirety, there are probably things that you want to see different. You want to see maybe a better sex life, or maybe more connection, or maybe more romance, or maybe just stop challenges that are there. Maybe you want to see the fight stop, or the arguments, or the energy drain, or the cycle you're in. So let's jump right into the 3 steps. And I'll give you a quick outline so you can kind of tag this in your mind, and then we'll go back and talk about all of them. Step 1 is outcome. Step 2 is systems. And step 3 is action or responsibility. And so let's talk about step 1, outcome. One of the biggest things that I see in relationship is there's no clarity of the outcome you want. There's something that you want to have different, but there's not a very clear, distinct mental picture or emotional picture of what that looks like. So you say, my spouse and I are having challenges. We're disagreeing all the time, and I don't like it. Okay, well, what is it that you would like instead? What is the outcome that you want instead of your spouse and you having arguments, or your lover and you having arguments? You might say, just give you some ideas here. It might be, well, I would love for us to be connected, passionate, and having great conversation every day. Like, I'd love for us to have really deep, connected, great conversation every day is the outcome I'd like. So you're going towards something rather than just going away from something. So that's the basic general principle. And we can talk about this a little bit and unpack some of the elements of how that might look in other examples too.
Yeah, and I think with this concept of outcomes, getting clear on what you really want is, I don't think it's a talent that a lot of us build in general. And as you're talking about these 3 steps, these are also the formula for success in literally anything. Like getting clear on your outcome, looking at the system, and then taking responsibility. Like, that's really sort of the formula for all success. And in relationships, it's sometimes difficult to look at those 3 steps in relationship because it feels unromantic. I think we have this idea that relationships should just be organic, and they should just be awesome because we're awesome and we're so in love, and therefore, like, our love will make it amazing.
Yeah. Well, attraction often is organic.
Yeah.
Attraction between 2 people, and we assume that the attraction then carries into the relationship, and that means that the relationship itself will also be organic.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's such a good distinction between attraction and relationship. And so because attraction does work that way, I think you're right. I think we end up assuming that that's how the relationship also will continue to work. And it's not. It just doesn't work that way. In order to have a really good relationship, you have to apply the same principles of success as you do in other parts of your life. And so this idea of getting really clear on the outcome that you want, I think it can be tricky in a relationship, because I think what we end up doing is, like you said, focusing on the stuff we don't want as opposed to focusing on the things that we do want. So I can think of, this idea. I remember a long time ago coaching somebody. It was actually a man who felt very frustrated with his relationship with his girlfriend because she was very unmotivated. He was like super motivated. He was an entrepreneur. He had all these big game plans. And his girlfriend was more of a homebody. She was a school teacher, but when school got out, she just wanted to sit around and like watch TV in the evenings. And it was really frustrating him. And so the way that he couched it was, I want her to stop sitting around and doing nothing. I want her to do something with her life. But the outcome that he actually wanted was, I want her to go on this journey with me, and I'm very ambitious. So what I want is I want a peer in the relationship. I want somebody who's in lockstep with me in the relationship. So his outcome wasn't super clear in his mind. It was, what he thought it was is, I want her getting off the couch and doing something. But what it really was is, I want a person who is supporting me and I'm supporting them in our big game ambitions. It ended up being that she wasn't the right person for him because she never wanted to do that. But as long as he was focusing on, I just wanted her off the couch, and then when she would do that, it wasn't enough for him.
Yeah.
Like, it never was satisfying. It was because they were not in the right relationship with each other.
Well, he was focusing on what he didn't want rather than what he did want.
Exactly. So getting really clear on the outcome you want is a little tricky, but I think it's the most important piece. It's this idea of, it's not just focusing on what they're doing that's annoying you or frustrating you in the moment. It's, what kind of relationship do you want in general? What would the relationship look like? And when we don't have clear outcomes, I think what ends up happening is we end up doing a compare contrast with other people's relationships in order to determine the success of ours. Whenever we have a clear outcome for something, we know if we're getting closer to it. But if we don't have a clear outcome, we're going to try to create markers of success or markers of whether or not we're getting what we want in some way. And it usually ends up being that because we can't compare it against what we really want, we end up comparing it against other people. And the challenge with that is, first of all, we always see people's relationship from the outside. And so other people's relationships look so much better than ours. And then we can't help but feel a sense of dissatisfaction. And the second thing is, other people's relationships are their own system of completely different, unique individuals that are not us. So using other people's relationships as a marker for how well we're doing at ours is already, like, they're not the same thing. You can't use other people. You can maybe use their happiness to go, oh, maybe I'm not happy. But you can't use the particulars of the relationship, because that's a system running based on a bunch of nodes that have nothing to do with you.
Well, when you do that, you're basically saying, I want to be somebody different than who I am. I don't want to be me. I would rather be that person over there than who I am. And really, that's never going to be sustainable, because you're not that person. So to measure yourself based on other people never will work, because that's not who you are. You are you, and your relationship is going to be unique to who you are. You can't measure it outside of yourself. You can look, again, for inspiration, for influence, things of this nature, but it's never going to look like your relationship that you create for yourself.
Yeah.
And I would also say that just the idea of the clarity of outcome, I just want to tag this really quick. Going back to the personality type podcast on relationships we just did, everybody's showing up different personalities, and some people have an easier time of creating the outcome in that metricized way you were talking about, where, well, I want a relationship that has these external markers, maybe an extroverted judger, for example, or even introverted judger. Any judger, for example, extroverts the things in their life. They measure things in the outside world more. But you can also do this with how you want to feel in the relationship. So if, let's say, you're an IFP in the Myers-Briggs system, the internal metric of how you feel is one that you can utilize to help you construct the relationship you want. It doesn't have to be like, well, we're doing these external markers, X, Y, Z, on the outside world. It could be, well, I want to feel passionate and alive and excited to see this person every morning. That could be your metric. It doesn't have to be something that's externally constructed. I just want to make that really quick tag.
I think that that's really important to look at too. And when we're talking about being very clear about your outcome, another thing that it does is it helps you gain clarity in areas that you might be unrealistically idealistic in a way that your spouse could never show up for you how you really want them to. And until you sit down and get really clear on your outcome, you might not know that you're doing that to them. I remember having an acquaintance who had a list. I mean, she was dating and she was trying to find the right person, and she had a list of like 175 deal breakers for whoever she ended up in a relationship with. I think we've even talked about this before.
Yeah.
Things like like not just being subscribed to certain magazines, but like the paper copy of them, not just the online version. So the outcome that it would appear that she was very clear about the outcome she wanted, but she actually wasn't. The outcome she wanted was an ideal, perfect situation, which I think was a sign that she actually didn't want a relationship. That relationship scared her because there was no way that anybody would ever actually be able to, to live up to this list.
Tick all those boxes off.
So the outcome that she really wanted was no relationship.
Yeah.
That was actually the outcome. But for some reason, she had convinced herself she wanted one and then just made it impossible to create. So getting really clear on your outcome and sitting down and being very intentional about it will reveal these aspects, because it's not just specifics that you want. It's like a general, how do I want my life to look? And how do I want my relationship to look? How do I want to feel? How does it operate? Like, there are different components to this, and getting super clear on it will help reveal to you areas where you might not be showing up the best yourself, that you might have idealism, or you might have a projection of what you think you want that is not entirely accurate.
And it's going to force you for some personal growth. You might have some fear around confronting what you actually want out of a relationship, because it would require you to be a different person potentially, to grow yourself to be the type of person that could be in the relationship and how you see it as an outcome. Let's say you want to be in a passionate, loving relationship with somebody that works alongside of you in a business that's growing and making millions of dollars, but you're not at the type of place in your life right now where you could show up that way. You don't have the work ethic or the discipline. So the relationship you want is going to require you to do things as well. And so that could be a challenge. And the other thing is, I think we also fear disappointment. If we set ourselves up with this outcome we want, we say, I want this relationship, I want this to look this way. Now we have something that we can look to and measure against. And if it doesn't happen, we're going to feel disappointed about that outcome. We're going to say, well, I don't want to even construct a really beautiful, wonderful outcome in my mind, because if it doesn't happen, I'm going to be too disappointed to handle it. So I'd rather not create that clarity of outcome. I'd rather just bumble through my relationships and try to just get the best I can get, because I don't want to feel the feeling of disappointment when it doesn't happen. So I think some of these things come up for you as you start to go down this road. I mean, I know this would come up for me. If I sat down and started crafting this out, these type of thoughts would pop up for me, and I'd say, oh man, I have to grow in this area to be able to create this what I want. And I also fear that if I say this out loud and make it a thing, I might not get that. And now I feel bad that I wasn't able to do that. I feel disappointed in life or in my relationships. So I think those are two things to watch for as you start down this process.
Yeah. I think the outcome that I would like in our relationship is that you and I continue to encourage each other to become the best versions of each other. That's like my perpetual outcome. My perpetual outcome is to eventually die like being the best version of myself possible, with the time allotted and the tools that I have, and just being realistic about everything. I want that for myself. I want to be the best version of myself. And the relationship is part of how I facilitate that. But that, you're right, that is scary, because it means that my outcome relies on me being very tuned in to all the ways in which I am not showing up as my best self. And so that is one scary piece of creating an outcome. And at the same time, it's also the thing that will give you the highest likelihood of success, because you have to sit with that. You have to sit with those moments, or the things that are revealed to you, the light and dark spaces that goes, this is probably why you're not getting your outcome.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to the second step, which is...
I did want to mention one more thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's cool.
Yeah,
Let's go to that second. The other thing too is there's this idea or notion that if you're very similar to what you're talking about, your acquaintance with the check boxes, sometimes people have a lot of this external marker for their outcome. And I would say that one more frame for your mind is to look at it in the sense of the why questions. So the outcomes are the whys, or the principle-based outcomes. So it's not that you have to live. I mean, you can get super specific on, like, I have to live, in Tampa, Florida, on the beach with a blonde hair, blue-eyed gentleman that, and all these like specific things that are like super like tangible things. The point is, why do you want to live at the beach? Why do you want somebody with blonde hair, blue eyes? I mean, you might be attracted to people like that, and that's what you're looking for. But the life and the outcome you're constructing around your relationship, and the passion and all these things, Why is that important? The principles can sometimes apply and be more flexible. I guess what I'm trying to say is build some flexibility into the outcome, because if you're too zoomed way in on the exact tangibles, you will most likely be disappointed. But the whys behind those tangibles are what you want to focus on, not the tangibles themselves, if that makes sense. I mean, get tangible as much as you can, but oftentimes those tangible things sometimes don't happen specifically. And that can also create disappointment. I just want to make that caveat. That's the principles behind it, I think, that are the most important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, if you're too hyper-focused on the what, like there's many ways to get to the same place.
Let's take your acquaintance, for example, the idea of having physical copies of the magazines. The why, the principle behind that is these were business magazines and technology magazines. The principle is if they have a physical subscription to those, that means they're invested in that industry and they actually care and pay attention because they are willing to put money into subscribing, and they have physical copies around their house. And they also want to showcase the fact that they're reading those magazines to the world. So the why behind having a physical subscription to those magazines is they're dedicated to business and technology, and they like to make sure other people know that about them. That's the principle behind the subscription to the magazine. But your friend or your acquaintance was focusing so much on the specific that she missed the why, I think. And I think that's my point in this outcome is, what happens if this amazing guy came into her life that still was really into business and technology and loved people to know that, but he didn't have a physical subscription to the magazine? The point of having the physical subscription is there. Why would you not look at that as a potential great relationship just because that little checkbox wasn't ticked off? And I think you gave a good example of why that probably was the case earlier. But I think that's what I'm trying to talk about is there's a why behind the things that maybe you have an outcome for in your relationships.
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification. I had a segue into the second part, but I don't remember my segue, so let's just jump into the second.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I just had to get that off my head while we're in this one part.
No, I'm glad you did, because those are really important distinctions and clarifications to make. The second piece of this formula is that you look at the system of what is being presented to you in your relationship as it is now. And we did an entire podcast on systems thinking in relationships just last week. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I think that that's a pretty darn good one for doing everything we can to be honest and accurate with what is actually happening, and looking for the parts or the nodes in those systems that we can actually do something about. So again, this is removing this idea of cause and effect. It's removing this component of taking the easy way out of the blame game or looking for a villain if you're feeling victimized. If you are trying to create the best relationship possible, then the best thing to do is to look at the situation as it is and do what you can with the reality around you. So in a situation where you are not happy in your relationship, then once you get really clear on the outcome that you want and the whys, the principles behind those outcomes, then look at the situation or the system that is your relationship and go, okay, what are the parts or the nodes that are not leading to that feeling or those metrics or whatever it is that I wanted as my outcome? Why is that not the natural emergent? What in the system is preventing that from being the emergent? And it could be something that's on you. It could be something that you believe is on them. And if you feel like your spouse or your mate is the node or what, like they're the emergent of some system that one of the nodes in there is on them to do something about, then one of the things you might have to do is you might have to make peace with that. It might not be something you can directly do something about. It might be something that you have to do a shift. But looking at the relationship itself as a system was one of the best ways to determine when you can show up. What are some of the things that you're bringing to the table that are maybe causing disruptions in the outcome that you want? Just last week, we talked about how, we can use a formula of looking at ourselves as people, as individuals, as systems, and then seeing how we fit into the relationship, bringing all of our stuff into it. And a lot of times the things that we're projecting onto our spouse is, they're to blame, is actually something that we're bringing to the relationship, but we just haven't been able to recognize our part in that. And then we end up projecting the problem onto them. That is the least empowered way to make any change, is to project something that we've shown up with onto somebody else because they can't do anything about it. It's not their problem, it's ours. So getting really clear on the outcome and the whys and the principles behind it, and then getting really honest and realistic about what are the ways that we're obstructing what we want in the relationship. What are the things that we can do? How can we break down the system that is me as an individual and the things that I'm bringing to the dynamic of the relationship that are relying on the things that I'm bringing to it in order to like keep that dynamic fueled? And am I fueling it with positive stuff, or am I fueling it with negative things?
Yeah, you could look at defining your outcome, being clear on what you want in your relationship as the what you want, and the systems part, the part 2 of looking at the system that's running and the emergence of the system in your relationship as what is. So you're looking at what you want first, then you're looking at what is, and that shifts us into the third part, which is all around action, or what we would talk about with responsibility. In other words, this idea of, okay, now that you have a clarity of what you want, you have clarity of what is already, now you can tie those two things together. Now you can start to look at, what do I have the ability to take action around? What do I have the ability in the system that's running with the outcome I want to influence the parts or nodes in the system to get a different emergent? And this seems obvious, right? Okay, what I want, what is, and then take action. But what's actually happening here at the action level is a lot of people say, well, I want XYZ relationship. This is the outcome I want. I'm getting really clear on this. And this is what is in the system. And I've identified the nodes. Let's say I've identified my spouse or my lover as the one node that I've determined, or one of the 3 nodes that I've determined needs to change. My spouse and my lover, maybe the town I live in, and maybe my in-laws or something. Maybe these 3 nodes you've identified. I'm oversimplifying this, but let's just say those are the 3 things you've picked out as the most influenceable. Which one of those do you actually have full and complete control and influence over? You are not your in-laws. You can't change them. You might be able to change the dynamic between yourself or your spouse. Well, actually not even between your spouse and your in-laws. Your relationship with them and dynamic, you might be able to alter and change. You can't change your spouse as a system or a node. And you can't really change maybe the town you live in right now because you've got a job you can't quit, or there's certain circumstances. Or you look at that and say, well, maybe I could change that. Maybe I could apply for a job in a different town, and that's one thing I could influence. So it's about identifying the things that are in the system that you have the ability to actually affect, change, and take action about. Because you can't change other people. You can only change yourself and the things you have control over. That's the only thing that you can alter in the system. You can influence other things, but often that comes from you changing yourself first and the things that you are influencing directly.
I think it's really important to look at this third piece as something that is very easy to pass off onto other people, which is the responsibility piece. I think we do it in every area of our life. And I think it's because it's uncomfortable to recognize how little control we actually have over things that are not us individually. We really don't have any control over most stuff in our life. But we can have high levels of influence. And making peace with the difference between control and influence, I think, is pretty important. Influence is very powerful. It's how we persuade other people to come to our way of thinking, and how we persuade the world to understand and want our will for us. Influence is really a big piece. And when we try to control a situation as opposed to influence it, what we find, I think, or at least my perspective, is that the more I've tried to actively control something as opposed to let it be what it is and try to influence it, is I have a short amount of power, or really it's more of like a force over the situation. And then as soon as I'm not actively trying to force the situation as I want it to be, as soon as I kind of let go of some things, it immediately goes back to the way that it was before. Because it wasn't true influence. I wasn't actually helping guide whatever the situation was in a way that the situation itself wanted to go that direction. Like I was combating my will and desires with other people's will and desire. And the second they stopped caring about my will and desire, they went off and did the thing that they actually wanted to do anyway. So influence is more helping us align the things we want with what other people want. Like we create an alignment, and sometimes we have to compromise. My brother's writing partner, I was having lunch with him and his writing partner. His writing partner's name is Daniel Abraham. He's a fantasy writer. And as most writers, he has these moments of like really kind of intense insight because, they just sit around and think all the time and they write these characters. And he said, in any relationship, the only right a person has is the right to leave. Everything else is negotiable. And I thought that was a really interesting statement to make. The only thing we really have control over in a relationship is ourselves, our thoughts, and fundamentally the ability to leave the relationship. That is something that we have control over. But in the relationship itself, we don't have any like definitive rights that are just on our side and the other person doesn't have those rights themselves. Like it's not like I have a right to make a decision about this thing and you don't get a say. So if you choose to be in a relationship, then that means that the entire, like you've just entered a dynamic or like a contract where you have chosen to negotiate everything with them. And that's part of influence. Influence is negotiation. It's trying to align each other's desires and the things that we want out of life and communicating things like the outcome we want and taking consensus on the reality of what is. It's very much, that's why communication is so important and connection is so important, is because that's how we influence each other. And so I think the reason why it's so easy to pass the buck and not want to take responsibility for things is because it terrifies us how little control we have in a situation. Like we get really scared. And so then we go, well, somebody's got to have control over this. So it must be them. They're the person in control and they're doing bad things.
Yeah.
When the reality is that they have just as little control as we do over most stuff too.
Yeah.
They're just trying to influence the situation as well. So then if you see each other in this team situation, right? Like neither of us has full control. The only thing we really have control over is the ability to get out. But in the moment or in the choice to be together, then let's align what we want. Let's align our outcomes and our desires and influence each other to want the same things. And now, because we're in lockstep with each other and now we're like we're in a three-legged race and we're making sure that we're in cooperation and we're not trying to like fight for what we want or go faster or drag the other person or whatever it is. When we recognize that we're basically in a three-legged race, then now we can influence each other to do the best that we can. And now we can take responsibility for the moments when the thing is really on us.
Yeah.
We're not trying to foist that off on the other person because we're recognizing that they're in the same situation that we're in.
Are you ready to get real here about, let's do a hypothetical situation. I want to run through this sequence here and let's just idea generate around something. I'm just going to pick something out and it's going to be an extreme situation to try to illustrate some of the points we're talking about. So we're talking about optimizing a relationship, right? And I want to throw in a node in a system. I want to throw a thing out here that I think is difficult for certain people in this type of situation. And how would this look working through it? So let's say there's a man and a woman in a relationship and the woman has... in the relationship, it was agreed upon that they were going to stay faithful to each other. The woman has created a situation where there's infidelity. She has cheated basically on her husband or her lover or whatever. And they've reconciled. That piece has already happened. Let's say this happened 5 years ago, so they've already reconciled. But what's happening is there's still fights about it. There's still resentment on the man's part, let's say. So he feels very resentful, and this is something that's happened in the past. And let's just walk through this process really quick. How would this look? For this man to optimize his relationship, what would it look like for him to look through the lens of these 3 steps to optimize the situation? So first of all, clarity of outcome. Maybe right now there's fights. Anytime something goes wrong, he's blaming or he's got all these emotions coming up and he's feeling icky about what happened 5 years ago. And supposedly there was reconciliation that happened, but he's having a tough time letting go of some of that pain, some of the anguish. And when every time a fight comes up around something completely unrelated, this piece floods into him. The insecurity, maybe the betrayal he feels, the certain feelings that come up flood over and overwhelm him in the situation. And then there's blame and there's arguments and a big fight breaks out. So the question, let's say we're sitting down with this husband and we say, the man in the relationship, we say, okay, what is the outcome that you actually want? By getting upset, letting this trigger you, holding on to this resentment, holding on to some of the bitterness, and when fights break out on little things or like disagreements break out, like, don't use the toothpaste this way. All of a sudden it breaks into this big fight about infidelity that happened 5 years ago that supposedly has been reconciled and forgiven and, moved on past. What is the outcome that this man wants? Does he get off on just having that power trip or control over the bad, icky emotions that come up? What's the outcome he already wants right now before he really looks at this?
Yeah.
And we can start idea generating some around this to help you listening walk through this in your mind too. You do this with us as we do this.
I guess I could see that there is a possibility that a person would get off on having that kind of power in the relationship, but I don't think that anybody actually, like our instinct is that is unsustainable.
Sure.
Like that is not a long-term situation.
But the man sitting there could say, what do I ultimately want to have happen here?
Yeah, exactly. And I think probably stuff that might come up for that person initially is things like, well, I just want to know that I can trust my spouse.
Yeah.
My outcome is that I just really want to be able to trust them. But I think a deeper outcome might be, I don't want to be alone. Yeah. So I'm with somebody who I went ahead and took the hit, but it's because I fear being alone. And so I'm willing to take the hit on quote unquote forgiveness, but the reality is that I can't actually forgive the infidelity. I just don't want to be alone. So my outcome is being in a relationship, any relationship, even this one. Or it could be the outcome is that I want my children to be raised with two parents. And so I felt an obligation to quote unquote forgive. So there's a lot of different reasons why a person would stay when they didn't actually forgive, even though they went through the lip service of doing so.
Or they might have a timeline of it. They went ahead and did it contractually or structurally, but the emotions don't always follow your thoughts sometimes. Sometimes there's latent emotions that are still in there, icky stuff. You feel that it's wounding, it's hard, it's difficult. You feel betrayed. You feel like you can't trust this person that's there. Maybe the genuine outcome of this person is, I would love to be healed here. The outcome is, I would love to trust this person. And I think you brought up a good point with the deeper piece of not being alone, but maybe it really is, I just want to feel connected again, trusting this person, and I don't want to feel all these terrible things coming up in my heart and my mind all the time. I really genuinely want that outcome. Without asking yourself what the outcome is, you're at the whims of what's just floating around. You're getting bounced around on the seas of emotion. It's really tough.
Yeah, and I think what's great about asking yourself what your ideal outcome is, or the outcome you want, is that it's probably a combination of a lot of stuff. It's probably a combination of, I don't want to be alone. And also, I legit wish I could go back to a time period where I just trusted them like I did before. And also, I'm doing it for a contractual reason or for kid. Like, it could be a bunch of stuff coming together. And I know that we talked about outcome being the thing we want, but it's also getting real and honest with what it is that is inside of us. Getting real and honest, because really the outcome, if it's that I just want to be in any relationship, then the outcome is relationship, not relationship with this person. So if that's the actual outcome, and you feel like you cannot actually ever forgive them, then that's a moment of real. That's a moment of like, oh, okay, well maybe this is not the relationship I want.
Yeah.
By the same, course, it could be that, no, I legit love this person. This person is the person I want to be with. And I just cannot seem to get through to a point of trust again. And how can I have intimacy with somebody that I can't trust? And so now I'm like torn. I'm internally torn all the time. I want to forgive, but it is not happening for me. So the ultimate outcome is a relationship of intimacy with this person specifically.
Yeah.
So getting really clear on that will help determine whether or not this is a sinking ship. If the answer is, I cannot forgive them even though I just want a relationship and so that's why I didn't leave, that is a sinking ship. That is not, there's nothing that can save that if the reality is that it can't, like, forgiveness is not a possibility for you, despite what you want. But at the same time, if the reality is that you're simply torn and you want to go back to a time period of trust and you want it with this person because they're the person you feel like you're supposed to be with, then now, I mean, like, that's two very different paths.
Yeah.
So just being super clear on what the actual path you want to be on is a big piece of knowing your outcome.
It's incredibly empowering. And when you have a clarity, and I think this is what we're talking about, so we're giving a hypothetical specific example, that kind of clarity can bring so much empowerment, to the relationship, to where you feel like you have a little bit more influence. You feel more empowered. You feel like you can actually do something about it, which leads us to the second part, which is the system running. What is actually set up? So let's just assume the person, this gentleman in this relationship, wants to create that intimacy and trust again. Let's say that they're 5 years ago, they agreed, I love this person, I'm gonna go ahead and agree to it, but it's been a process of emotion and toughness, and they've had all this come up, but they sit down and they really ask themselves what they want, and they've determined that it is about trust and intimacy once again, and connection. And then they look at the system running and they realize that's not the emergent right now. The emergent is fights, disagreements, hostility, bad emotions, ickiness. Like all these things are coming up and they just feel awful about it. Diagnosing that system is critically important.
Well, and if trust is let's say that the eroded trust is the biggest node in the system, then the only thing that will make the person feel better is to know whether or not cheating would ever be an emergent again. And so the real system that has to be addressed is the system of why cheating was the emergent for that person. What was the system running that made it so that infidelity became inevitable for them? And is the system that made infidelity inevitable, is that system altered enough to know that that will not be the emergent again? Has whatever caused the person to cheat in the first place, has that system been settled? And if the answer is no, then no wonder that person would be constantly on high alert and not feeling good about the situation and not feel like they can rest into it.
He's panicked. He's thinking, oh man, this could happen again at any moment.
And if you don't know why the cheating happened, like sometimes when something that painful happens, like infidelity, you don't even want to know what the circumstances were.
But it is a system, just like anything else. There was no cause and effect. It was an entire system running, and you, as the other partner, were a node in that system, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, well, and it might not have anything to do with you really in the abstract. It might be that your partner comes from a very broken situation, that they were bringing their baggage into it. And the question is that are the pieces that caused that situation to happen, have they been addressed for the other person? I think that in some percentage of marriages where infidelity is a situation, one person could completely be at blame. It could 100% be the person who cheated and the other partner was 100% innocent. I think that can happen. But in most situations, this was something like there was a system going on or a dynamic between the two people that the innocent party or the person who was on the receiving end of the act of infidelity probably was unconsciously pouring into that in some way. Now, that doesn't make them culpable. It doesn't make them at fault for the situation, but it does mean that may be a node that needs to be addressed. And if that hasn't been addressed, or the nodes in the system of the person who committed the act of infidelity, if that hasn't been addressed, then of course you're not going to ever feel like you can rest into trust again because you don't even know why it happened in the first place. You don't know why disloyalty happened in the first place. So if you don't know why it happened, then what assurances could you have that it's not going to happen again?
Yeah.
So getting really real about the system that led to that will also help you diagnose. Like that is what is. And if there are systems running that you can't do anything about, and it is incredibly unlikely that those systems will change because they are on the other person, then that also gives you clarity of action.
Yeah.
Like if you can't do anything about that, if you cannot influence it for the better, if that is something that just simply cannot be changed, then you now have more clarity about whether or not you can reach your outcome. And if the answer is no, I cannot reach my outcome, then now you have more information to work with.
Well, and that takes us to step 3. So running through this hypothetical situation, you have the clarity of outcome, you diagnose the system of what is, and then you determine, what do I have actual influence over? I can't control, and a lot of people in this situation, I could totally see a husband maybe, or a man in the relationship saying, okay, well, I'm just going to control the schedule of my lover or my spouse. I'll make sure that I always know where she is at all times, and that'll be how I control this. Or there's all sorts of different dynamics that might influence come up in the control parts,
Or I know all their passwords.
Yeah.
And so I go read their emails
they have to give me all their passwords and private messages. And they might have these, what can I take control of at this level? And, what you're really looking to say is, based on the outcome I want and the system that is, the ultimate outcome I want. The ultimate outcome you want is probably not having to snoop on your lover's email all the time. That's not a sustainable outcome, and that's not even fun for you. You probably hate having to feel that you have to do that as that man, right? Like that would not be an exciting thing to have to do all the time.
I doubt anybody's outcome is that.
Exactly.
Is forcing creating a context where the person, like, you force them to have to find creative ways to cheat on you if they're going to do it again.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's nobody's ideal outcome.
Yeah, you want them to be with you because they want to be with you. I'm guessing, like, that's what I would want, right? So this is an idea of what can you actually take control of that's not like that? What you have influence over. Maybe it's showing up different to the relationship. Maybe it is, like you said, realizing that this is not sustainable. There will never be trust rebuilt. And you can't really move on. So you decide to complete the relationship and move into something different maybe. Or maybe it's just something that this person does. They have, in the system you've diagnosed, they have shown that they show up with a lot of integrity now. And they're oversharing, saying, hey, I was just going to the store, and they're giving you a lot of communication because maybe before they were secretly texting or going places you didn't know where they were going. And now they're being over communicative to give you that assurance, but you're still having the emotion come up. And maybe the action you can take is to realize, you go back to square one and say, okay, this emotion I'm holding on to, what is the outcome I want from this emotion? And you say, I don't know. It doesn't bring me happiness. Happiness is my outcome. This emotion isn't leading me to that. And then you go through a healing process to let that stuff go, that ickiness that's inside of you go. Maybe that's the action step you take. But again, it's about stuff that you have control around, you can influence directly or indirectly, and you have the ability to affect that change. It's not about them necessarily changing on the other side or other things external of yourself. Because to me, that's gambling. That's like playing the lottery. Well, I hope I'm a millionaire if I play the lottery. Like, it's kind of like that with a relationship. It's like, I hope this person changes, and if they change, I'll be happy. What a terrible life to live if you're waiting for somebody else to change for your happiness. That is so disempowering and so pointless as far as I'm concerned. It'll never work out for you well.
Yeah. Well, and we actually did a podcast called General Semantics, where we talked about how we tend to use one word to describe many different situations. And I think infidelity or cheating is a catch-all phrase to indicate a lot of different contexts. So a person could cheat or, be disloyal to an arrangement in a relationship because they actually don't have a sense of loyalty to their spouse. And that could be something that is permanent just in and of itself. It could be that the person themselves has a lot of personal issues, like a lot of issues where this is one way that they combat extraordinary insecurity or lack of self-worth. Or it could be something that they maybe need some like healing work around, like legit therapy around, because it's something that's really toxic inside of them. It could be that they're going through a time period in their life of extraordinary unhappiness and they're just doing anything and everything to try to get out of it. Like they're basically punching at the air, just trying to do anything to get out of their misery and unhappiness. And it may or may not have anything to do with their spouse. It could be it could be something going on with their perspective or paradigm, or it could be a time period of extraordinary change, or it could be a relationship with a family or whatever. Like, cheating is something that's very easy to demonize and assume what all the situation is. But a person going from the ability to cheat on their spouse into a place of integrity, because integrity is ultimately the thing that helps us rest into a trust of each other in the relationship, is knowing that your spouse is coming from a place of integrity. So the question is, why did they lose integrity to begin with? And is there a way where you can help influence the system to get them to become a person of integrity? And the answer is you cannot control that. You can't make that happen, as you've just been mentioning, Joel. You cannot force a person to be a person of integrity, but you can help influence them to be that way. And a part of it is by saying, why do you think that you lack integrity? Like, what has eroded your integrity to a place where you would do this to a person? And it doesn't even have to necessarily be me. Like, if you leave this relationship and go to the next relationship, if you continue to be a person who lacks integrity, this is a pattern that will resurface in some way. So why do you feel like integrity is the thing you're struggling with? And what are the things that we can look at to encourage you to go back to a place of integrity? Do you not feel like yourself? Do you not feel like you can show up as yourself? Do you feel like forces around you are have you disjointed from who you are? Like, what kind of research do we need to do, or what kind of introspection, or what kind of therapy or healing work do we need to do to get into that space? And just having that conversation right? Like actually calling it for what it is and looking at the system of what it is and trying to work with the system. If your spouse is a person who wants to rebuild the relationship with you, they'll go to that space with you.
Yeah.
And if they won't, then maybe you've got your answer.
Yeah. And I want to, so that was pretty heavy, right? Talking about cheating and infidelity and all this and like just fixing problems in your relationship. Let's end on a high note. Let's just talk about the optimizing piece. I mean, that was pretty heavy, right? So let's talk about what can you do to be using the same 3-step process to make your relationship even better.
Yeah, and I think when the opposite of solving problems or challenges in a relationship is being proactive. And I think you can use the same formula to sit down with your mate and ask, what is our outcome for this relationship? And be like proactive about it. Like, this is the outcome that I would like for the relationship. And your spouse goes, oh, this is the outcome I'd like for the relationship. And they might be different. And you didn't know that.
Yeah.
You didn't know it until you started talking
and
about it.
Don't wait till problems come up to do that. Start now while things are good, while you're happy and in love and things are positive.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you can go, things are working out pretty well, but what is it fundamentally that we want to have accomplished at the end of our lives, maybe? Or maybe you see relationships as not being necessary. Maybe you're serially monogamous and you don't expect to end the relationship, by death. Maybe you expect to end it at some point in the future, but you just want to have a realistic conversation about what you'd like to get out of the relationship. You and I are like, we've talked about how we'd like to die holding hands together in our like old age. That's our ideal.
Hopefully it's old age.
Yeah. Hopefully, fingers crossed, like super old age. And the outcome that we'd like for a relationship is actually quite similar. Like, we want to accomplish something big in the world and have an impact, and we want to have done it together. And we've had conversations around the outcome that we'd like to, eventually have as a couple.
Yeah.
And then once you do that, then you look at the system of your life and go, are there any obstructions to getting to the place that we want to go? And if there are obstructions, let's proactively find those obstructions and influence them for the better. Let's do it together. And then taking responsibility. What's some of the stuff I'm bringing to the relationship that might cause an obstruction, and what's some of the stuff that you are bringing? And you and I talk about, I think you and I both have come to the conclusion that our physical health is something that both of us struggle to maintain, like a really good balance on that.
I wouldn't say we're unhealthy. I would say we're not looking to optimize as much. Like, that's one of the things that's a blind spot for us. Yeah.
I mean, things like getting enough sleep at night. You and I both burn hot. We'll be working all night. We find ourselves working until 11 o'clock at night. And then now we want to like unwind. And now we're not to bed until like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that. And then like we get up the next morning at like 7 or 8 and we do it all over again. And we're like, hey, so we're like perpetually sleep deprived. Maybe we should attend to that. So it's stuff like that. Just being really realistic about what we're bringing to it, and looking at each other and going like, well, I probably am not encouraging us to get good, sleep and develop good sleep habits because of this. And you might say something similar. And so we might have to be really realistic about what we're bringing to the table on that and be responsible. And so I think one of the best ways to use this formula, if things are not going poorly or you don't have major challenges to solve, is to look at it in a proactive way and make sure that you guys are on the same page. Like, just make sure you're on the same page. Just have a conversation about what it is that you want out of life. And make sure that you don't drift apart. I think one of the most toxic things that can happen in a relationship is that you've got two people who have two different outcomes, and they didn't talk about that, and now they're both working hard for their individual outcomes, and suddenly they've grown apart. Like they're living completely disjointed lives. And they go, oh yeah, I guess you're kind of all the way over there doing your life, and I'm all the way over here doing my life, and I guess we're not really living our lives together anymore. So I think that that's one of the best ways to use the formula, is to make sure that you are working together in that three-legged race.
Yeah.
In order to keep and maintain a strong, powerful relationship.
Well, and if you sit down as a couple and you diagnose and diagram out the system that's running and the emergent of your relationship, you now can point to things that are nodes or parts of the system, and it can help reduce a lot of maybe blame in a future date. And also you have language and the ability to objectively look at all the things that are playing. So when, some tension comes around the holidays, it'd be easy maybe last year to say, well, your mother, blah, 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 blah. Now you look at the system and go, actually, it's not just his mother. It's also the kids and this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. And so you have a more fair-minded, not blaming and not seeing it all as cause and effect again.
Yeah, or I saw this happen last year and I didn't do anything about it, and here it comes this year. So who really can I blame?
Yeah, exactly. So you both have like a map almost you're looking at for the relationship, and you're saying, oh, this is the map of our relationship, the emergent. This is what's running, and these are all the things that are influencing it. And then when something happens, you can go, wait a minute, that's that node over there. And we had this last year. We had a certain situation come up, and there was a big node, and it's very easy for me to look at that one big node and say, well, that's the cause of a bunch of stresses and all this. And I stopped for a second, and both of us look at each other and we laugh and we go, well, there's a lot of other factors too. There was a very large node in the system that was running, but there's other things contributing too. We can't just say that was one thing. And it helps us not blame each other or look at each other and go, oh, like that one thing was toxic or whatever.
Yeah, or create scapegoats.
Create scapegoats after the fact, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think then you get to the point at the third step in optimization, you say, okay, what are we going to take? And if you do this as a couple together, this is super, then you're starting to like pour gasoline on a little fire and just blow your relationship up in passion, excitement, and fun by saying, okay, what are we going to start taking responsibility for as individuals and as that third entity as a couple? And we talked about this a long time ago in a podcast where we talk about there's actually 3 elements to a relationship. There's you, there's the other person, and then there's the relationship in and of itself. And oftentimes, healthy relationships see that third entity that is the two of you together, and it honors that and respects that as well as the two individuals, almost like a third person. The two of you together represent like a third entity. And you start to say, okay, what are we as a third entity going to do and take action about together? And now you're starting to glue yourselves together, and that passion, that connection, that deeper intimacy starts to form there.
Well, and I think you'll also identify like kind of trouble areas. Like you said, oh, there's that thing again. There's that note again. I've noticed for me, it's when I lose gratitude. Like whenever I get detached from gratitude for my life, that's when things started going south. And so after we recently talked about in a previous podcast about some challenge that we had in the last week or so, the last couple of weeks. And we mentioned that it took like a full day of detoxing from it to kind of figure out what was going on. And for me, I realized here's that old culprit of a lack of gratitude coming up again. And as soon as I kicked into gratitude, my entire demeanor and my entire mindset changed. And so I've noticed that for the most part, if I lose my grip on gratitude, then we're going to have challenges. I mean, I'll infect you, and the entire relationship has challenges because I'm losing gratitude. So things like that will come up for you. You'll go, oh, here's my insecurity again. Here it's coming up, and I can kind of see it happening. And then once you have language for something, it feels like you have so much more power over it. So if you see these patterns coming up over and over, this is the node that I'm bringing, my lack of gratitude. As soon as I remembered that, then I was able to go, well, then I need to focus and meditate on all the things I'm grateful for. And then I had the power, the ability to shift my mindset. And then almost overnight, the entire dynamic changed. So it can be a really powerful experience.
Yeah. We'd like to hear from you. We've talked about optimizing your relationship in this 3-step process, defining outcome, understanding the systems that are running, and then taking action and responsibility for the things that you can change in that system. What do you think? Your voice is important. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a comment or ask a question directly below this podcast. We want you to be part of the conversation. We want to hear what your voice and your opinion has to say. What is it that you see in this? Have you implemented something similar in your life? Are there things you're struggling with that you go, wow, this would be a great way to apply a simple framework to either optimize or fix things that are going wrong in my relationship, whatever that is? I want to hear from you. You can also come over to two of our communities that are forming online. They've already been formed, but they're just continuing to grow. Facebook.com/personalityhacker or Twitter.com/personalityhack. There's conversations happening there daily. New people are joining both of those communities daily. People that think very similar to you, people that want to grow themselves, that want to understand all these frameworks we talk about, like typology, the Graves model, systems, little ideas on how to optimize your life. We want your voice to be represented. So come on over and join that community. Be a part of that with us, and we're there too. We love to connect with you on those platforms.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you would like to leave a rating and review on iTunes, that helps us out a lot.
Yeah. Also, download our app. We're on the iOS and Android platform for our app. That's a really great way to listen to the podcast. It's built right into the app, all the articles, all the content. Everything's in a neat little package on that app. So if you download the app, it's free on both of the stores, Google Play and the iTunes Store. Download the app, have it on your phone, your mobile device, and you could be part of this conversation on a regular basis right there on your mobile device. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.